Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the shock news that Nigel Farage will be surrendering control of Reform UK, with the reason seemingly being to allow it to become a real political party and build for the future. Now, how will this affect the political landscape over the next few years? Is it going to be good or bad news for the Tories? But first, if you'd like to be kept informed on political commentary, please hit the subscribe button. So this prompted a bit of a change in my intended video. There I was, getting ready to talk about millionaire Tory scroungers. Now I'm talking about millionaire Tory scoundrels. Never mind, certainly not going to complain about too much news at the moment. But I did do a video a little while ago about Reform UK's new chair, Zia Yusuf, talking about the need for Reform UK to reform itself into a real political party with a membership structure and local networks in order to get activists out campaigning. He said himself the problems at the general election is the only constituencies where they really had a presence on the doorstep was actually in the seats they won. Now, I wondered at the time how Nigel Farage would take this. I mentioned that in an interview on Channel 4, earlier this year, he was asked about the prospect of turning Reform into a real political party, and he sounded very resistant to the idea. His answer was sort of, well, is it really necessary? Do we have to? Well, it seems that he's now changed his mind, or others have changed it for him. Ahead of the party's first conference as a parliamentary party, Nigel Farage has announced that he is surrendering all his shares. He said that the ownership of the party would be passing to the members. Now, it's worth pointing out that as of this moment in time, you have enough fingers on one hand to count the Reform UK members. In fact, even if you had an unfortunate accident with some heavy machinery or a firework and lost a couple, you'd still have enough fingers on that hand to count their members. What Reform UK has when it refers to members are subscribers to a newsletter who pay for it. They've got no rights whatsoever. But that sounds like it's changing. According to the reports in the BBC, these subscribers will become members. They will be able to vote on policy motions, vote on a new constitution, vote on party rules and the responsibilities of the leader. Which to me sounds like a recipe for disaster, by the way. But I suppose the calculation will be such is Farage's cult presence within the party. He will suggest which motions are good and bad, and the faithful will just vote the way he tells them to. At which point what you have is the illusion of being a real party. But, you know, it will still have the basic structures. And it is still risky, mind you, because not all Reform UK members, which we could then call them at this point, will necessarily revere Farage as some sort of prophet. And what's to stop people joining the party in order to deliberately vote in ways that Farage wouldn't like? You know, both Labour and the Conservatives in the recent past have had problems with people flooding into the party in order to hijack its core operations. I mean, on face value, it sounds to me like Reform UK are swinging from one extreme to another, from having zero engagement between party executive and the supporters to actually putting the lunatics in charge of the asylum. That being said, you know, I'm only going by something that Farage has said. The reality could well be much more controlled than that. For example, I noticed that one new rule in the BBC article will be that a confidence vote may be held for the leader if 50% of the members write to the chairperson requesting it. That's actually a massively high bar. Bear in mind that a Conservative leader needs 15% of MPs to request a vote of no confidence, and even that bar is rarely met. It's 20% in Labour, and that's a recent change. It used to be 10%. But the point is that the idea of requiring 50% of actual members, that's a very high bar to reach. In fact, if you can get to that point, what's the point of having the confidence vote? Because it already means the majority, like the only reason to request a confidence vote is because you want to vote no, that you don't have confidence. So if you get a majority who've already expressed that, what is the point of having the secondary vote? And besides, Farage enjoys the status of cult leader among supporters. So even if you did have a significant influx of entryists, it's unlikely to be able to take advantage of that rule anytime soon. Apparently, the rule will also hold if 50% of Reform MPs request the confidence vote. Now, with so few MPs at the moment, it probably doesn't matter. But again, it's a very high bar compared with other political parties. In fact, given that there's 5 Reform MPs and you need 3 of them to vote Farage isn't going to vote against himself, and his mate Tice isn't either. So you'd need literally all of the other Reform UK MPs to say they don't want Nigel Farage in charge. But anyway, maybe the senior members of the party are playing it a bit safer than appears. Interestingly, the BBC article does say that according to Yusuf, the party has more than 80,000 members. Now, if that's true, this is always a big if, that's actually a lot. That is a lot by any standards for a party like this. I mean, I compare that with the 54,000 members that the Green Party of England and Wales reported as having at the end of 2021, which is the latest data I could find. I mean, it may well have increased itself in the run-up to this year's election. But it shows that Reform have managed to attract enough active supporters to establish themselves among similar-sized parties in terms of parliamentary presence. Their problem, as Yusuf is happy to point out, is they don't really have a ground game. They've been unable to marshal an army of activists to go out campaigning ahead of elections. The Greens may have one MP fewer than Reform in the House of Commons, but they've got 813 local councillors to Reform's 27. And local government representation, that matters for general elections as well, because councillors are your local organisers. They rally and direct a lot of the efforts in campaigns. So if Reform are to do more than win the title of most inefficient vote, they're going to need to start doing a lot better in local elections, beginning next spring. But it is a double-edged sword, isn't it? All political parties will attract people with extreme views, which are not exactly voter-friendly. But whereas it's a dirty little secret that you try to brush under the rug most of the time for other parties, Reform actively encourage many of these people. I mean, we saw the trouble it landed them in during the general election campaign. At the time, of course, it seemed to do little to harm the party who picked up 5 seats. But they picked those seats up and the 4 million votes around the country at a time of maximum displeasure with the Tories and the country in a ruinous state. Now, I'm not sure whether the Tories will really pick themselves up ahead of the next election, but just being in opposition for a few years may rally a bit more support to them. But the main thing is, what happens if Labour do manage to start to realise a more positive view of Britain's direction over the next few years? The first people Reform will lose are the pragmatic voters, who maybe at the moment believe that neither the Conservatives nor Labour have got the answers. So they think, oh, well, maybe we need the more extreme answers that Reform are proposing. But they're ultimately, like most voters, they just want things to work. If things do start to work a lot better than they expected under Labour, these will be the first to abandon Reform UK. They won't necessarily go to Labour, but they'll at least go, oh, maybe we don't need the extreme answers, which only concentrates the loony presence within the party. Now, how will that manifest itself in future years if they get more say in the running of the party? And how many more scandals will emerge? We had plenty at the general election. How many candidates did Nigel Farage have to drop because scandals emerged? Their shady past came up. Skeletons came tumbling out of the closet. But it was relatively easy for him to do that because they had a top-down approach to the general election. It was all Nigel Farage and that national campaign, that national message. And they knew that these guys weren't going to win anyway. But, local elections where they actually do want these people to win. What happens if they massively increase their number of councillors, but then shady past details come up, and what do they have to do then? Do they drop them, at which point they lose those councillors? Or will there be so many they end up just running on the spot? If they drop them, then they're back to square one. If they don't, then they're saddled with the scandal. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But we saw what sort of people Reform UK attracts at the election. And candidates for local government positions actually tend to get less scrutiny by parties than for Westminster seats. And they really didn't get any scrutiny for the Westminster seats. There's every chance that in announcing the surrender of these shares, which, I'm not going to criticise because they should become a proper political party. But in announcing it anyway, Nigel Farage has potentially announced that Reform UK are indeed going to be providing the main political entertainment over this Parliament. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.